What's an NSFW fact about history that we don't get to hear too often? From the 13th to the 15th of February, the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, Roman precursor of Valentine's Day, which was a festival of love and fertility. Priests would sacrifice a goat and then cut the goat skin into pieces. Part of this they would wear on their heads, and other parts were cut into thongs. The men would then run around the city of Rome naked, hitting as many women with these thongs as they possibly could. Being hit would help with pregnancy or becoming pregnant. So depending on what they wanted, the women would either deliberately stand in the way of the men, or try to run away, while pretty much everyone was naked. In another part of the festivities, men would draw names of women from a jar, and the goal was that they'd stay together for the duration of the festival. This would often result in a lot of, intercourse, and sometimes people actually fell in love and got married after they met during Lupercalia. When Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, was taken from Sion Abbey to the Tower of London to prepare for her execution, she sailed in a barge down the River Thames. She passed under London Bridge, where the severed heads of her alleged lovers Thomas Culpeper and Francis Dereham were waiting for her, displayed on spikes, rotting and picked at by birds. Henry VIII was spite-made man. Pope, I will not grant you an annulment. Henry, fuck you. Pope, what are you going to do? Make your own church. Henry, eyes widen. In 1511, a bunch of people in Brussels took part in the building of 110 vulgar snowmen as an act of protest. Edit. It's known as the Miracle of 1511, if you want to know more. Most Belgian thing ever. I'd say the Genk students taking over the fortress and throwing fruits at the police to protest the rising price of beer is even more Belgian. Take it from me, building a snowman with a harden is much tougher than throwing fruit. Not just silly, dedicated silliness. During war time, some armies would wipe shit on their spears, so that when they stabbed /slashed enemies they'd get that extra poison damage. In medieval times, they would sling dead animals via catapult to spread disease, which was devastating in those times due to lack of proper medicine. It seems biological warfare was the world's actual first weapon of mass destruction. I learned about this in a documentary called Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Monty Python does wonderfully informative documentaries. Try and catch the one on the Roman occupation of the Middle East, which uses the life of an ordinary man called Brian to illustrate the benefits and pitfalls of said occupation. Very enlightening. Witches were more often mutilated than actually burned. Were they trying to find spare lumber to build a bridge? Who are you, so wise in the ways of science? A lot of people banged in the White House on the day of Andrew Jackson's inauguration. Why? There was a big party, and hey, how many times are you going to have that opportunity? Mozart was into scat humor, like a lot. He also fucked his best friend's daughter and would later marry her, all because his best friend wouldn't marry him. The original Jacob from Twilight. How about the time that NASA funded a study about dolphin communication that ended with one researcher giving a dolphin that was high on LSD a hand job? https://www.theguardian.com/environment/2014/Jun/08/ The dolphin who loved me. Didn't it fall in love with the woman? Then when the research was stopped, the dolphin committed suicide by swimming to the bottom of the tank and not coming back up. That's what I've heard. From the article, I got that phone call from John Lilly, she recalls. John called me himself to tell me. He said Peter had committed suicide. Rico Berry corroborates the use of this word. Dolphins are not automatic air breathers like we are, he explains. Every breath is a conscious effort. If life becomes too unbearable, the dolphins just take a breath, and they sink to the bottom. They don't take the next breath. Andy Williamson puts Peter's death down to a broken heart, brought on by a separation from Lovett that he didn't understand. Margaret could rationalize it, but when she left, could Peter? Here's the love of his life gone. Why is this thread making me sad? It started so well with dick and farts. But of course there had to be a suicidal dolphin. The deadliest female serial killer in US history had murdered 35 people with an axe by the time she was 18 years old. Dear Diary, my teen angst bullshit now has a body count. Name: Clementine Barnabet, member of a cult called the Church of Sacrifice. Preferred murdering several family members at once, often decapitating them. Not so fun fact, she was out of prison before she was 30 and never seen again. I'd rather not know what her actual body count was. What? It's okay though, she was sentenced to jail at 18 in 1912, so I'd say she's long gone by now, hopefully. This Justin, a 126-year-old woman, was arrested today for being mean to a man, saying, "If I still had my strength, you'd be toast and a foot shorter." King Tut's first wife was his half-sister, but she also may have been his full sister and even at one point may have been his stepmother. Incest was actually encouraged in ancient Egypt, as in many aristocracies, to keep the bloodline pure. Moreover, if there were twins where one was a boy and one was a girl, they were married at birth, because it was assumed that they must have banged in the womb. Victor Hugo, the guy who wrote, among other things, Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, was a sex addict. He claimed he and his wife had sex 9 times on their wedding night. When she got bored with this, and I don't blame her for that, it just all sounds way too much, he proceeded to go and bang everyone and everything that caught his eye. When he died, the brothels in Paris were closed down for the day so all the prostitutes could go and pay their respects to him. Fittingly, Paris apparently experienced a mini baby boom 9 months after his funeral, which 2 million people attended. Can you imagine if they did DNA analysis and figured out how many kids he had? He may have had a lot of kids, but brothels back then did have a means of birth control. Obviously not as accurate as today. In ancient Greece, many city-states had these landmark/mile marking/good luck statues called Hermi, which consisted of a bust of a god's head and, for some inscrutable reason, an erect phallus at its midsection. In 415 BC, someone mutilated the Hermi of Athens in exactly the way you'd expect. Athenians were outraged, initially accusing their enemies, the Spartans, of de-donging the deities, then deducing that it was drunken revelers, before blaming Alcibiades as the Nobnabba. Alcibiades was an Athenian statesman and military leader famous for being Socrates' boy lover, as well as having a rather rowdy reputation. He's depicted, in Plato's Socratic works, as being frequently shit-faced and giving long and rambling, yet very articulate, "I love you, man," speeches. To rob the god's rods frankly just seemed like the sort of thing Alcibiades and his brothers might do. And he also had a lot of petty political enemies. Alcibiades strenuously denied the accusations and offered to stand trial immediately to defend himself. Athens, however, decided to wait until after he had left for a military expedition to try him in absentia, condemn him to death, and order him to return home to die. Alcibiades chose instead to defect to Athens' enemy, Sparta. This was during the Peloponnesian War against Sparta, and right on the eve of the Sicilian expedition which Alcibiades had planned. Unsurprisingly, the expedition was an unmitigated disaster for Athens, and arguably led to their defeat in the war. Alcibiades, on the other hand, served Sparta for a time, only to defect to Persia after he had been caught sleeping with the king's wife, and then, years later, convinced Athens to take him back and clear him of any charges. TL. Doctor, some rock cock knockers led to Athens' defeat. In ancient Egypt they held a fertility festival each year, and at this festival it was the pharaoh's responsibility to strip down and jerk off into the Nile. According to their mythology, the Nile was created when one of the gods jerked off. It's a river of god spudge, similar to Milky Way. According to Greek mythology, it was created when Hera was breastfeeding Hercules. Apparently, he was a nip biter and clamped down so hard, she had to violently pull him off. Tom hurt it and accidentally squirted her milk around. Edit. Some context, yes, for all of you who are confused, because Hera hated Hercules, Zeus sneaked up on Hera when she was asleep and allowed Hercules to suck on her breast, hoping that her breast milk would give him godlike powers. Hara woke up because he was biting her nipple and she violently pushed him off, squirting the milk. Why would Hera breastfeed Heracles? I thought she sent a snake and a dozen trials to kill the bugger. His father, Zeus, was fond of his son, who was born of the mortal woman Alcmene. He decided to let the infant Heracles suckle on his divine wife Hera's milk when she was asleep, an act which would endow the baby with godlike qualities. Pope Alexander VI might have held orgies where he kept track of men's orgasms while he held the position of Pope, and also definitely had an infidelity fetish, especially with women, whose wedding he'd officiated. He had 4 kids with one married noblewoman and at least another 3 to 5 outside of that. So very pious. He's not alone either. https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/list_of_sexually_active_popes. Pope John XII was said to have made the sacred palace into a whorehouse. Benjamin Franklin had a fart fetish. There are letters that prove this where he writes to a woman about her flatulence. Benjamin Franklin was also a emphatic fan of having sex with older women and would write letters to others recommending it. He said they had experience and enthusiasm. Edit. Typo. Advice to a friend on choosing a mistress. Basically, he said, all sex is the same with the lights off, and it's even better if the woman has experience. The face first grows lank and wrinkled, then the neck, then the breast and arms, the lower parts continuing to the last as plump as ever, so that covering all above with a basket, and regarding only what is below the girdle, it is impossible of 2 women to know an old from a young one. And as in the dark all cats are grey, the pleasure of corporal enjoyment with an old woman is at least equal, and frequently superior, every knack being by practice capable of improvement. The author of Frankenstein lost her virginity on top of her mum's grave. It was a graveyard smash. Mary Shelley, goth legend. But terrible funeral etiquette. Remember how you used to say over my dead body, mother? They call it mourning wood for a reason. A French president died from a blowjob. Edit. Well, he had a heart attack while getting a blowjob. But the way I said it first sounded more funny in my head. Quite literally got his soul sucked out of him. Real life succubus. Think of all the life insurance you could collect if you were that good at BJ's. You'd have to do all the work of being named beneficiary first, and I do not have time for that. Which French president was that? Ways popes have died. Pope John VII was bludgeoned to death by the husband of his mistress when he caught them in flagrant delicto. John XIII met his end, so to speak, when a cuckolded husband rammed a poker up his bottom. Pope Leo VII suffered a fatal heart attack during sex with a page boy. I can't read in flagrant delicto without hearing it in Tim Curry's voice in my head. Mozart wrote a piece called Lick My Ass. I hear that Lick My Love Pump was written as a continuation of it. Edgar Allan Poe married his 13-year-old cousin when he was 27. I heard this was actually pretty wholesome. https://thedelf.com/2020/03/18/The Short Sad Life of Edgar Allan Poe's Child Bride/ That article doesn't highlight it as much as others I've read. But the impression I got was that he married her to care for her in a sibling type relationship. Edit. EHH. Maybe not. This thread is half fun silly things and half horrible atrocities. What a freaking roller coaster, man. The key is to find the fun in the atrocities along the way. The atrocities were right there in our hearts all along. The CIA once considered sending the Soviets condoms that were large labeled small to convince them that the US was well endowed. Source: https://archive.totalfratmo.com/CIA once considered convincing the Soviets that all Americans had huge dongs/ During the rape of Nanking there were accounts of Japanese troops forcing families to commit incestuous acts. Sons were forced to rape their mothers, and fathers were forced to rape their daughters. I'm scrolling through the comments, laughing mostly, and then your comment left me speechless. It lasted over 5 or so weeks and they killed over 300k people. Japanese were monsters when it came to what they did to those who they captured. Imperial Japan was on some other shit bro sauce. My great grandfather was shot and killed in the Philippines by a Japanese soldier when he was fetching water for his kids, essentially making an orphan of my young grandfather. French modern philosopher Michel Foucault, in addition to studying crime and deviance in a criminology sense, also applied his theories on punishment to his fascination with BDSM, having also written a number of kink-based works. He eventually moved to San Francisco and partook in gay bathhouses, notorious for casual sex. He eventually caught HIV, and some have speculated, it may be written somewhere, that he purposely contracted it as some sort of poetic social commentary. Oddly, I learned this stuff while getting my administration of justice major and studying corrections, lol. Not sure if anyone else mentioned it, but when at a Salvador Dali museum, they mentioned that he had a shit fetish. He was alienated from a lot of the modernist movement and even kicked out of some art society he was in because they found out. And I'm not talking anal, I'm talking literal 2 girls 1 cup fecal stuff, lol. All the documentaries you see about hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt neatly avoid showing you the fertility rites where the pharaoh's phallus is inseminating the land. Edit. Thanks for the cock, guys. In the 1880s, James Jameson, heir to the vast Jameson Irish whiskey fortune, purchased a 10-year-old African girl just so he could draw her being eaten by cannibals. Jesus, I initially thought that this was just a fucked up slavery thing where he bought a girl and had her pose so he could draw some weird painting. But no, he literally paid for a child to be fucking eaten. What the ever-living fuck? There are disputed claims that both Napoleon I's and Rasputin's members were, well, dismembered during their respective autopsies and have traveled the world extensively, possibly farther than either men ever did, as well as being shown in multiple occasions to the public. On a similar note, it is well known LBJ had a massive Johnson, and Rasputin's girthy schlong was venerated amongst high-class women of his time. No wonder he's indeed Russia's greatest love machine. The bit about Rasputin comes up in the SCP Foundation. One of the SCPs is Rasputin's reanimated body, and he's very unhappy about certain modifications. Unforgivable. Nicholas, you whore. I hope Lenin skins you alive in hell. My penis is in a museum. Sparta is a treasure trove for this kind of thing. Sparta's marriage rituals involved the kidnapping of a girl, then dressing them in men's clothing and shaving their head so they looked like a man before having sex with them. To be fair, most of those guys hadn't even seen a woman at that point. According to records, King Jejung of the Shilla Kingdom had an 18-inch dick. Edit. I think the focus should be that they wrote it down as such, not that he actually had one, which sounds greatly exaggerated. That hurt my cervix even reading it. I remember seeing an erotic historical Korean movie about a guy with big cock. Maybe it was him. Female hair grooming is not a modern thing. Ancient Egyptians were removing their pubic hair. So were noble ladies in medieval France, among many other societies. Edit. Including Rome and ancient Greece for the higher up in society. 18th century French waxing parlors, and that some form of body hair trimming for both men and women is advised for those of the Islamic faith. There is even an anecdote. This is half remembered, and I can't find a source. So please if someone can confirm what source, of a married French noblewoman insulting a knight for not being able to grow a beard, and that he must be a bad lover. The knight asked whether she had pubic hair. She confirmed that she did not, the fashion at the time. He then asked if she was a maiden. She replied that she was a married woman and adequately fulfilled her duties to her husband. The knight then replied that they must be as good lovers as each other, and the whole court, including the lady, burst out laughing at his mostly beardless face, and she apologized to him. I guess the reason that I commented is that whether driven by societal pressure, peer pressure from women to look pretty or men to look sexy, this is a reoccurring theme in history, and that people should not be judged for their choices either way, and should do what makes them feel happy. Edit 2. Again can't find the source, but there was a banned book from England in the 19th century of a dude who slept with a lot of women from all different kinds of backgrounds, and he described all kinds of pubic hairstyles, including bare. Maybe they had a condition that meant body hair didn't grow, but to me, it shows that with their bodies, particularly something that will grow back, people will always strive to do their own thing. In an era when you barely had any time to yourself, shaving your pubes off could be your own kind of personal individuality. Edit 3. Big thank you to you/666, who has corrected me that it is an Irish-born individual who wrote this book based on his experiences in the 1920s, but I think my point still stands. 1984. During the Iraq/Iran war, Iraqi forces had laid hundreds of exposed electrical wires in the Majnoon marshes which they knew the Iranians had to cross. Those wires were all snaked together and connected to large electrical generators. When Iran attempted to cross the marsh with boats, Iraq used just enough concentrated artillery to force the Iran soldiers out of the boats and walk through the marshland. As soon as that happened, the Iraqis fired up their generators and electrocuted thousands of Iranian soldiers in an instant. That's not the worst part. The Iraqis then sent in a road building detail and collected all of the Iranian dead and stacked the bodies like cordwood, 5 corpses high and 5 across, covering them with lime and then a bunch of sand. They used the Iranian dead to build a road for their trucks to cross the marshlands. The sheer hatred, madness, and precision needed to pull this operation off, as well as carry it through, is just horrific to think about. Astronomer here. In 1992, 2 astronauts did not disclose they were married to NASA until it was too late to replace one of them, and thus became the first married couple in space. While the 2 astronauts in question are not the kiss and tell types, most people assume this means space sex has happened. Obviously you don't have to be married to try it, but it does make it harder to figure out the couples. NASA's official stance is that it hasn't, but I'm not sure people really believe them. Genghis Khan, after defeating the Russians, laid thousands of them bound and stacked like cordwood and built a platform above where he and his generals feasted. All the while the men below suffocated and were crushed to death. Source: Dan Carlin's excellent The Wrath of the Khan series. Wasn't there just his 2 generals though? If I recall, Temujin was off erasing the Khwarezmid Empire from existence. The Shah of the Khwarezm Empire first rebuffed the Khan's overtures of peace with hostility and then doubled down on the insults when the Khan generously resent his diplomats, thinking the Shah had merely mistaken his intentions. The result was the complete eradication of his empire within a few years. Read about Cap Cook. He discovered Hawaii. They docked offshore right at harvest time. The natives thought they were fertility gods and sent their women in canoes to the ship. The crew had a blast year after year, until the natives figured out what was happening. The Romans would often include bestiality as halftime shows for their gladiator matches with strange animals up to and including swans. Are you not entertained? I'm not. You know that one psychologist guy, Freud? Well, one time he was tasked with finding the testicles of an eel, so he got literally hundreds of eels so he could find their balls. Nowadays we know eels have retractable testicles, but Freud didn't know that, so he cut up hundreds of eels looking for their testicles. They're all women. Get me more eels. Anne Frank's diary was censored for her privacy. She wrote many entries about masturbation and her bisexuality. Her father cut those out. Surprised but not surprising. I mean, teenagers are horny, even in the midst of unspeakable cruelty and oppression. That's pretty much the bread and butter of the ya genre. The Japanese used to put Chinese babies on their bayonets and pose for a pig. Edit. The cases section give you some examples. https://n.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Nanjing_massacre. Unless you're Japanese, the rape of Nanking isn't that obscure. The babies in that one pic are just one of the many atrocities. not NSFW but James Buchanan, US President, never cohabitated with his wife, and after his death several love letters were found that he had written to his assumed lifelong male partner. Andrew Jackson, being the ever-present bully he was, always referred to Buchanan and his partner as Miss Nancy and Aunt Fancy. History would be everyone's favorite subject in school if the books focused on the things mentioned in this thread. They seem to purposely make history boring. History is thousands of years of human drama. It's more interesting than most movies and TV shows because truth is often stranger than fiction. Oh man. Do I have a book suggestion for you? https://www.amazon.com/underground education unauthorized outrageous supplement /dp/038548377 all the best NSFW facts from arts and business to sex and medicine. One of my favorite pieces is on Mark Twain's defense of small penises when invited to a big dick boat cruise. There are pieces on erotic church art used to increase attendance. There is a history of women's underwear. It has it all, and it is great for dinner parties, but some of the facts are so out there people will doubt what you are saying. Personally, this book has led to several expeditions to the Library of Congress. I can't suggest the book enough. Edit, added more context and stories. Lyndon B. Johnson was quite a vulgar president. He has been reported to have carried meetings into the restroom if he had to use the restroom during the meeting. He also referred to his Johnson as Jumbo, and you can easily find recordings of him making a phone call to a tailor requesting his pants be made with extra room in the area. Edit, change the wording. He wasn't called LBJ for nothing. Georgios Karaskakis, Greek general during the Greek War of Independence, was at one point arrested by the Ottomans and asked to surrender. Karaskakis was known for swearing a lot. His response was, "I asked mighty **K, and it told me no, not to surrender." May have already been said, there are thousands of comments, but Pope Alexander VI threw a party that is referred to today as the Joust of Whores. He had a large number of women attend a banquet he was throwing, get naked, and would scramble to pick up chestnuts that the Pope and other people at the party threw at them. This party was followed by Alexander holding a contest to see who could sleep with the most women by the end of the night. During the whole thing his kids were also present. Alexander also liked watching his horses breed and would arrange for upwards of 100 horses put outside his palace so he could watch them for hours. Catherine the Great had a lot of phallic furniture. Edit, spelling fail. Phallic? Yeah. I blame pregnancy brain not being able spell. A Nazi doctor injected blue dye into the eyes of hundreds of Jewish people in an effort to make them Aryan. He blinded many people. Ick now. They portrayed the Nazis as being cold-hearted machines, but this puts them into perspective as being stupid fucking assholes that got empowered and became stupid and fucking evil. Holy shit, can you imagine being a state-sponsored doctor and thinking you could make someone's eyes blue by putting dye in their eye? Jesus fuck, they were dumb. It is speculated that the crotches part of the armor codpiece was enlarged, not to make the knights and kings' junk look bigger, but to alleviate the pain caused by syphilis when their genitals made contact with the metal pieces. Syphilis. It's quite interesting how prevalent syphilis was. Blackbeard and his crew of pirates had a special horn that they used to insert into their urethra. This was then used to flush in mercury, which was believed to be the cure for syphilis. Zhang Zhanchang, a Chinese warlord dubbed by Time as China's basest warlord, was nicknamed Old 86, which referred to either his height or the length of his penis, which was rumored to be as long as 86 Mexican silver dollars stacked together. He was also a poet. Case in point, you tell me to do this, he tells me to do that. You're all bastards, go fuck your mother. Poem about bastards by Zhang Zhanchang. There was also this one time during a famine where he visited a temple and, instead of praying and offering gifts, slapped the temple's statue and said, "Fuck your sister. How dare you make Shandong's people suffer by not giving us rain." Then proceeded to order his artillery to shoot into the sky until it rained. It rained the next day. Edit. Minor grammatical corrections. Ferdinand VII of Spain had a huge dong, so much in fact, that it's rumored that one of his wives died of a hemorrhage derived from having sex with the monarch. He almost died without a rare BC. He couldn't have sex with the queen consorts without any damage. He only had a daughter, and he had to go through hell to change some old laws that prevented his daughter from reigning. Edit. Adding info. Edit 2. They designed a cushion thing for him to try to ease sex. Sorry for any grammar or spelling mistakes. English is not my first language. Before the advent of abortion, mothers would often choose between infanticide, poison in the nipple, intentional smothering in bed, or burying alive for instance, or abandoning the infant either in the woods or in public. This was generally less to hide indiscretions and more, because they already had too many mouths to feed. Abandoning the child was considered to be the more guilt-free option. A mother who left their baby in the woods could comfort herself with the thought that maybe a woodsman found and decided to raise the child, for instance, although it almost certainly suffered and died of exposure. They could pretend for the rest of their life that their child was just fine out there somewhere. Men invented cages to go over a sleeping baby to prevent the mother rolling over, and were surprised to learn this didn't help. BECAUSE. So few cases were actually accidental. An interesting alternative popped up, which was foundling homes, which first came about in Italy during the Renaissance. This offered a tempting alternative to abandoning a child in nature. This was a home. However, it was an open secret that this option usually meant death. There weren't enough wet nurses to go around, and no formula meant that the death rate of these abandoned infants was above 90%. This was an open secret. Mothers knew the babies placed here would probably die, but it allowed them to ease their own conscience. The amount of babies abandoned per year in one foundling home in one city in Italy was in the thousands per year. Before these homes, it wouldn't be uncommon to find dead infants in trash heaps, on the street, or in a river, and the foundling homes did decrease this, but increased abandonment altogether. Some mothers even began abandoning their infants specifically to be hired into the foundling home as a wet nurse. The pay was too tempting. Keep in mind this was still the case well into the 1800s. Simone de Beauvoir was a French feminist author, professor, and Jean-Paul Sartre's kind of girlfriend. She was fired from her job in 1943 for abuse of minors. She had been seducing her underage female students for them to sleep with her and with Sartre, who had an appetite for virgins, and they wrote to each other making fun of these girls. Sarah Sally Hemings was an enslaved woman of mixed race owned by President Thomas Jefferson. Multiple lines of evidence indicate that Jefferson had a long-term sexual relationship with Hemings, and historians now broadly agree that he was the father of her 6 children. Hemings was a half-sister of Jefferson's wife, Martha Jefferson. Edit. Long-term sexual relationship means raped. Slave owners in the US had a health official who would lick slaves to see if their health was of good standing. HMN. This one seems to have a cold. You didn't need to lick him to see that. Mozart was obsessed with poop. He wrote at least 39 letters which mentioned something about poop, usually letters to his family, including his parents, sister, and cousin. He also wrote a few musical pieces about it, including the infamous Leck mich am Arsch, in English Lick Me in the Ass. Some of this is disputed by Mozart scholars, but typically it's because they don't want Mozart's legacy to be tainted by his love for shit. There's a whole Wikipedia page about it. At the Temple of Aphrodite in Cyprus, overlooking the legendary birthplace of Aphrodite, young virgin girls would tie a bowstring around their head and await a man to come along and throw a silver coin of any value into their lap. The man would say, "I demand thee in the name of the goddess." The girl then had to have sex with the man. In this way the girl would make her first fruit offering to Aphrodite. It is said that some girls had to come back for many days before they were chosen. In the 50s the KGB tried to blackmail the Indonesian president by getting him to come to Moscow, where a bunch of girls got him to have sex with them. When the KGB showed him the video he asked for extra copies, saying the Indonesian people would be proud. The Japanese soldiers who are sent across Asia used to round up able-bodied Chinese men to shoot and kill in an effort to stop the Chinese from revolting and to prove that they were superior to the Chinese. Most of the people who are killed in the colonies were Chinese, all to prove they were superior. In fact, their methods were so brutal that literal Nazis told them that they were going overkill. The Congolese Holocaust. Between 1890 and 1910 an approximate number of 10 million people died as a result of the Belgian colonization of Congo. One area was appointed to the Belgian King Leopold II, being Congo, a nation 76x larger than Belgium. In 1885, the Congo Free State was formally proclaimed by Leopold II with the stipulation that all vacant land belonged to him. Leopold II determined when there was vacancy. In practice, the land with all the raw materials became the property of the Belgian king. The first large group of victims of the Congolese Holocaust were luggers, people who had to carry all kinds of things in the jungle: ammunition, ivory, food, including wine and pate, equipment, and so on. Sometimes they were paid, but often enough they were forced to work, men, women and even young children from 7 to 9 years old. A second group of victims were the workers. They worked themselves to death. There was a quota system per village and per man. Charles Lemaire, a district commissioner, wrote, "In order to collect rubber, hands, noses, and ears had to cut off. The cutting off was meant to intimidate other workers. An officer of the force publique put it this way: I will kill 100 people and let 500 live. Those 500 will work with fear in their hearts to reach their quota." The cruelty of the murders was unprecedented. A worker who had brought 50 baskets of rubber was killed under the watchful eye of his colleagues because one basket was not completely full. He was tied to a palm tree in 3 places: his feet, his stomach and his hands, that were shattered as well. A Belgian officer shot him with his revolver from a distance of 20 meters. A captured Congolese was blown up with dynamite in his anus. Another was hung alive on a palm tree with his feet above the ground. A fire was lit underneath him, and he was boiled alive. 2 Congolese were poured resin over their heads, and then set on fire. The tortures and whippings with whips, made of hard rhinoceros skin, claimed many victims. The descriptions of the atrocities are heartbreaking. One NSFW fact in quotes, because it's a disputed claim, is that the original French champagne coupe glass was molded around Marie Antoinette's left breast. As I said, it's a disputed claim, but there is historic precedent for titty cups such as the Greek Masters Cup and others. In Pisa on St. Catherine's Day, students would search for and capture the fattest Jew they could find and demand a ransom of his weight in sweets. Source: The Great Mortality, John Kelly. The actual death of Radcliffe, you know, the oddly proportioned villain from Pocahontas? From the Encyclopedia Virginia, the colonists, led by Captain John Radcliffe, walked into an ambush. About 33 men, or 2/3 of their number, were killed. The Indians captured Radcliffe, and their women skinned him alive using mussel shells. Genghis Khan killed 10% of the world's population in his day, and had so much sex that 2% of people today are related to him. For those wondering, 2% of 7 billion would mean 140 million people are part of his lineage. Back during the Age of Sail, sailors would go months and months without any women or any privacy. When they'd get to port, hundreds of prostitutes would take boats out to the ships to greet the sailors, who would almost all have sex with at least one. This included the ship's boys. Like I said, there was no privacy at all. The crew would share one huge room. Dozens or hundreds of men sleeping in hammocks slung 28 inches apart. So the ensuing copulation took place in the wide open. Hundreds of people having sex all over the ship in plain sight. This wasn't a rare thing. It was almost universal, though some more religious captains wouldn't let the prostitutes on board. STDs were therefore incredibly common. When people complain about moral decay of society, it really just means to me that they don't know about history. Society is quite chaste today compared to much of the past. NASA tried to teach dolphins English, and during the experiment they not only gave dolphins LSD, but a female scientist jacked off a male dolphin to relieve him, so they didn't need to take breaks. That story also has a really sad ending, since the dolphin essentially committed suicide once his relationship with the researcher was put to a stop. Ciabatta was invented in 1982. Nachos were invented in 1940 by a dude named Ignacio. In the 70s someone figured out how to do that liquid cheese thing and started selling them at Cowboy Stadium. Howard Cosell loved them so much he kept talking about them all throughout Monday Night Football. And now we have nachos everywhere. You know when we say, "How's it going?" as a general phrase to inquire about a person's health. Well, that comes from the French comment "Allez vous," which was a phrase asked by doctors around the Renaissance period to inquire about how you are shitting. How are you going to the toilet is what was meant, because at the time one of the ways to have precise information about someone's health was to have a look-see at his bowels. I find it funny that it has become this everyday phrase that is said all around the world. At the time, hearing someone answer not so well could be that guy's last words. Auschwitz had a brothel. Tales from the surveyors who worked there say sometimes the guards given the honor to use the facility would often just want to cuddle and were as distressed and terrified as others. Catherine the Great really didn't die having sex with a horse according to her son Trigger III. Wait, I just got that. King James, yeah no, like the Bible, had a gay lover who he was absolutely obsessed with. He gave him multiple promotions in status and had a secret passage that connected their chambers. George Villiers, not Willis, Duke of Buckingham, I think. I was reading about King James being gay last week. There was a guy that tried to prove that yellow fever wasn't contagious, and so he would pour the infected vomit into his freshly cut open wood, pouring it into his eyes, and drinking it, and soaking into a bath of it, and smearing his body with blood, pus, and spit. He was fine, because yellow fever isn't spread through direct contact, it's spread through mosquitoes. So he did all that for nothing. His name was Stubbinsworth, look it up. Columbus sold kids as hoes. There has to be better things to use to farm the land. Yes, but the hoes were already sold as dogs and the dogs were sold as children. People have been having sex all throughout history. You have no proof of that. You are proof of that. In ancient Egypt, soldiers proved their battle prowess by presenting the severed penises of their slaughtered enemies. Traditionally, severed hands were presented, but in 1182 BC, Libyans and other allies invaded Egypt and were defeated by the army of Ramesses III, and Ramesses suspected that some soldiers were claiming extra credit by presenting the hands of women as well as the male soldiers. So he demanded penises instead. His victory inscriptions mention 12,535 foreskins and hands, and has images of the piles of the body parts at the Medinet Habu mortuary temple. Lyndon Johnson had a large dick that he loved to show off and whip out at weird times. He once peed on a Secret Service agent and would take men swimming nude in the White House pool to intimidate them with his penis. I read he had his tailor make extra room in his crotch and leg for whichever side he dressed on. Hitler had 2 genital mutations, an undescended testicle and a rare condition called penile hypospadias in which the urethra opens on the underside of the penis. He used a drug cocktail including bull semen to try and boost his virility. The dude was all messed up. Source: I heard the Allied propagandists made a lot of stuff up about his health to make him seem weak, but not much has ever been confirmed. Apart from the amphetamine addiction, and probably Parkinson's disease. More not school friendly than NSFW, but we learn the merry legend of Johnny Appleseed, who wandered around planting apple seeds wherever he went, so apple trees would grow cause he loved apples so much. In reality, Johnny lived on the frontier and was pretty good about knowing where future settlements would crop up further west down the Ohio. He'd get there ahead of time, plant apple seeds to start a nursery of apple trees, fence it in, and come back and tend it now and then. When people showed up, He would hire one of them to watch and tend the orchard for him and sell the apple trees to new settlers, stopping by occasionally to make sure everything was okay and get his cut of the money. The big thing they don't tell you in school is that apples that come from trees grown from seeds don't taste good. If an apple tree produces apples that taste good, at least back then, you grafted a piece of the tree into the ground to clone a new tree, not plant its seeds. So Johnny's usually probably tasted like shit. That didn't matter, however, because mostly what settlers wanted was apples to ferment into booze. Yep, Johnny planted apples so people could get liquored up. But you try telling truths like that to first graders and the school board suddenly gets all up in arms about promoting drinking and handing out apple mash to kids, and oh my god, Mr. Don't _PM_me_ breasts. You're drunk right now, aren't you? Not my fault that Billy couldn't hold his booze. And I'll be damned if I'm going to teach lies to kids just cause the man tells me I can't drink moonshine during planning period. Hookers came from General Hooker during the Civil War. He would bring women of the night over for his soldiers and they were referred to as hookers girls. Then it was obviously shortened to what we know today. Saw one Catherine Howard fact, so here is another. On the night before her execution, she practiced laying her head on the executioner's block. Not only for minutes, but for hours. I always feel very bad for her. In the 1880s and 1890s, the French Dr. Brown Sequard claimed to have successfully treated a number of diseases, including neurological complications of syphilis, by injecting testicle juice under the skin. The end. Thanks for watching.